Welcome to another episode of Echoes of and Youthful Voices, a podcast by the U.S. and Frank Youth Network. Today we are speaking with Jill, Jazmyne, and Eboni from the Center of Civil Rights History and Research. So today I'm just going to have them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they do at the center.
Hi, I'm Jill Found. I'm the chief historian at the center, which means I get to research, write, and develop exhibits, plus answer historical questions people have.
Hi, my name is Jazmyne Brandeis. I'm the education coordinator at the center, and my job entails a lot of developing engaging programming for young people and learners of all ages.
Hi, I'm Ebony. I don't have a real title at the center, but I do a little bit of everything, so I'm kind of like the Swiss Army knife, so to speak. So I do a lot of programming and background engagement as well as forward engagement, kind of just all the things.
So if you guys could give kind of a brief overview of what exactly the Civil Rights Center is and what you guys do.
Yeah, so the Center for Civil Rights History and Research was founded in 2015 here at the University of South Carolina, and our goals are to preserve and interpret the history of South Carolina and the civil rights movement. So we do all kinds of things from public programs with scholars and civil rights veterans to developing exhibits and giving tours. We visit classrooms of all ages. We talk to people of all ages. We answer research questions, and we work with students to try and help build their understanding of the civil rights movement and the history of the movement itself.
Perfect. All right. How does the Civil Rights Center connect with the community, especially young people?
Well, there are many ways that the center connects with people of all ages, especially with young folks here in South Carolina and beyond. We have our pop-up exhibits that travel across South Carolina to different classrooms at the request of different schools. We also have traveling trunks for various grades that have a bunch of classroom materials. But among that, we also have walking tours with folks like Ebony and myself, where we get to make Main Street or our exhibit currently at the Museum of Art, the intersection on Main Street as well, our other classroom where they get to have different field experiences and see history in a new light outside of a textbook experience. So there are many different ways. There's also other public programming and events that we are part of that are with children as well. That is really just really fulfilling to see all sorts of learners, and especially starting at the youngest of ages, understanding concepts of civil rights.
No, that's great to hear. We love to do the same here at the center, especially with our traveling exhibit. So it's just really great to see another side of history be able to have the same impact on our youth. Anne Frank and Martin Luther King Jr., both symbols of their respective communities, were born in the same year, 1929, and are known for their writings. For most of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, he had deep optimism, much like Anne Frank's. How do you feel that informed his work in the movement?
I think for Dr. King, his optimism was really vital to his day-to-day activism, right? He's living in a time and a place where people who look like him are deprived of their very basic rights, right? Their rights to citizenship. And so in order to believe that a better world is possible, in order to believe that you can make change, I think you have to be deeply optimistic. And for Dr. King, a lot of that came, I think, from his religion and his studies, his study of people like Mahatma Gandhi, and this belief in nonviolent action and its ability to make change, I think was really critical to his ability to do the work that he did.
To add on to that with his optimism, I think a lot of people don't take into account that King was just a regular Baptist preacher from the South. You have Martin Luther King's here within the community as well. So just kind of thinking about him and the stature of him not being this national figure that we made him to be. And then also just, people say it all the time, but love tends to win in all these situations, as tragic as they may be, even now within society. So you have to have that optimism to move forward. And because he was a leader, if he didn't have that optimism, his followers wouldn't have that optimism, which even just goes down to, we're talking about the children and the part they played with grassroots, with being right there on the front lines, essentially, with like Jail No Bail as an example. So him starting the optimism, of course, started the force and, of course, a larger nonviolent movement. And without that, who's to say what history would have looked like in that portion of time had he lacked that optimism?
Yeah, and I love how you said that there's a lot of kings in the community, and I think that that's a big thing that we love to do here at the center is that use Anne Frank's story as a way to create your own story. Obviously, we love to tell the story of Anne Frank, but I think it's really important to say, "Hey, this happened to her. How can I compare this to my life?" I think, especially with me working with the Anne Frank Center, I'm not Jewish, and I think that it's been really important to me to say, "Hey, I've taken Anne Frank's story, but how do I showcase this to the Black community, or how do I, really emphasize Black history as a way of connecting the two instead of just channeling my work towards one group of people." I feel like the whole idea of activism is sharing it with everyone. So that was really nice to hear you say that as well. Anne Frank's diary was written in isolation, as was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s diary. Many great works have been written in confinement, under different circumstances. Can you tell me about the act of writing during the civil rights movement from any work or research you've encountered?
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things that I've learned about the civil rights movement in my research is the degree to which people had to be convinced to write things down. We hear a lot from activists who say that, they were just kind of going. They were doing the stuff, they were doing the work, and they had to be told, you need to write this down. So a lot of the writing that happens during the civil rights movement is really practical writing, right? It's how-to guidebooks, right? How to be part of a nonviolent protest, how to teach a class, how to have a sit-in. But it's also communication, correspondence, and in that material you can see the ideas behind the movement. But for a lot of the activists who are involved in the day-to-day stuff, they're writing because they have to communicate, less because they want to share their ideas broadly. Though obviously that happens with people like Dr. King and lots of other figures who are highlighting the movement. And it happens in other forms too.
So speaking of some of those other forms, a really big one during the movement was photography. So specifically here in South Carolina, we have Cecil Williams, prominent photographer, freelance at a teenage age, like 13, 14 or so. And a lot of the work that he did photography-wise is how we inform our tours and just those physical pictures of what happened here in South Carolina. Because unfortunately, we are often overshadowed when it comes to the national story, and a lot of things happen here first. And with Cecil Williams photography, and even the museum he has in Orangeburg today, that better expands on what was happening here directly through the lens of photography. And of course, he's not the first, but specifically in civil rights, we like to think of him as the important parts of South Carolina, if you will.
Yes, thank you guys for your answers. What other impactful people would you suggest that young people look into to deepen their knowledge of the civil rights movement?
One person I always recommend folks look into is James Baldwin. He wrote a really powerful work called The Fire Next Time. It's a very short book that he wrote as sort of a letter to his nephew about the struggle of his life and the life of Black people in the United States in the late 1960s. And I think it's an incredibly powerful book that still resonates a lot today and has informed a lot of how I think about the civil rights movement.
Someone who's local and still living with us is Dr. Cleveland Sellers, whose memoir is The River of No Return, correct?
Yeah.
And that is another retelling of his life that included surviving and being blamed for the Orangeburg massacre that occurred in 1968, where 3 students from South Carolina State would lose their lives due to the hands of National Guard.
So then the fairly new book that just came out, I believe last year, by Cecil Williams, so that same photographer, and his co-author Claudia Brentson, and it is Injustice in Focus. Thank you.
Perfect. So our next question is a little easier. Are there any lessons that you guys have learned from working with young people at the Civil Rights Center?
You want to start?
Yeah. Okay. I'll start. And really, I usually leave most classrooms feeling like the work is super, super important, and it's only just beginning in a way, because I'm like, that's just one classroom down, but there's so many more to go, and it's a great challenge and great part of my life, in my opinion, to just be part of informing young people of something that I didn't get to really understand until I was later in life. That's what I'll say.
That sounds great.
Anyone want to add into that? You guys interact with young people too.
Yes. I think that young people don't get they don't have the best rep, at least society wise, with people saying, oh, the young people don't know anything. They don't know, well, what have you taught them?
Yeah.
So I think for specifically because we are the Center for Civil Rights History and Research here in South Carolina, it's important to know about what happened in your own backyard. So I think what I love about what we do is this is the first time that a lot of children are interacting with this work and realizing like, oh, my grandma stays down the street from that person, or oh, my aunt worked with this person. So understanding that within civil rights, these were everyday people. So it brings it down more from that kind of higher upper echelon that we put our national figures on for people to understand these are people like you and me doing this work. So then it also shows them that, maybe as they get older, they can also be involved in this work. Yeah. And also understanding that civil rights is not over. It's still something that's actively happening.
Definitely. And one thing I want to add, I think that's so important. What you said is that it's important to realize, okay, this is in my own backyard. I remember I was in elementary school and we learned about, oftentimes after slavery was abolished, like slave owners would give their land to their slaves. Obviously, typically it was during sharecropping. And my dad's family actually received their land from their slave masters, and we have 10 acres in Beaufort because of that.
Oh, wow.
But I would have never known that if my teacher had not brought that up to me, and I would have gone back to my dad and been like, hey, like I learned about this, or researching my last name and being like, oh, Lawton plantation, like that's actually the plantation where my great grandparents worked on, and now we have that land. So I think it is really important just to spark this curiosity, because I think that's how you deepen your learning, is just being curious genuinely. We know that there are thousands of oral history interviews of Holocaust survivors. Can you tell me a little bit about your work with collecting oral history interviews relating to civil rights in South Carolina?
Yes, that's a lot of the work that we do. I'm thinking about somebody specifically, Miss Sophia Wangaza, and she was a member of SNCC. And what I love about the oral interviews that we do, once again, is a lot of untold stories. So we get different perspectives of people who may have met King or may have interacted with Malcolm X and things of that nature. And then even with just doing oral histories, there's more than us just doing the actual oral history portion. Sometimes we end up driving out of town or even out of state to go and talk to these people and sit down and kind of basically essentially live with them, not physically live with them, but we go through their things, bring back archival material as well, but really just having all these different perspectives of what's happening, because we always have, one main person here, maybe an opposer there, but to just have the kind of in-betweens. Yes. And to just kind of inform those little spaces that we don't know anything about is always a favorite part for me when we do the oral histories.
Yes. I think that's a great perspective to look at, because I think the average person falls in that in between. So I think it's, again, really important to highlight that perfect person, because that's the average person that you look at every day.
And if I was just going to add real quick,
of course,
that Eboni mentioned SNCC, which is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and it's a student-led organization, right? When it was founded, it was young people and students who were leading this, right? Almost all of the major activities that happen in the movement are young people carrying them out. Even if they had sort of adult advisors, those adults were still pretty young usually. So a lot of these folks that we interview are now older, they're aging, some of them are leaving us. And so there's this huge importance of trying to collect those memories as much as we can before those people pass away.
Thank you. That actually segues perfect into one of our other questions. So I'm going to jump around to the next one. Is there anything that you would want to share with our young audience of the members of the Anne Frank Youth Network? Young people who care about the network's core values of equal rights, active citizenship, and building a future free of discrimination, prejudice, and injustice.
Absolutely. You are important. And that might be seeming very cliche, like, of course, I know I'm important. My parents tell me I'm important. That's wonderful. But I'm saying that in the sense of the people that we talk about and we research, they were, once again, ordinary people. They didn't think anything they were doing was, over the top or special. So understanding that what you write down in your daily life, even if it's, maybe your Google Calendar, I don't know how they're going to record things in the future, but understanding that this is how we create history. Everything that we've been learning in school, what we've been taught up into college or even beyond, it was simply just people just living and existing and writing these things down so people can have that information for the future when, we're not here anymore.
I'm gonna change my answer. I would say, especially just in advocacy work, it's important to be informed, but also to keep a temperature check on yourself, to not overconsume, because you can sometimes just be bogged down with the tragedy part of studying this history and the terrible parts. It sometimes feels like just it can override the joy that comes out of it. And it's very important to um, take pace. But it's also important to inform others and staying informed. You can't keep it all to yourself. If you keep it to yourself, you have no use for it. That's what learning is for sharing. So sharing that knowledge and teaching others is part of advocating and part of advancing democracy and equal rights as well as educating others.
Yeah. And as you're going about that work, it's important to save the things that you make, right? Whether it's a poster from a demonstration or, like Eboni said, a Google Calendar, right? That there will be people in the future who are interested in these things, that there are archives that want to collect these things, that people care about the work you're doing, not just now, but for people in the future as well. So the things that you're doing matter for a long time.
The Anne Frank Center has a few traveling exhibits which share her life to students across the country. Can you tell me a little bit about you guys' traveling exhibits? What has been the response and feedback to these exhibits, and do you have any plans to expand your exhibits or develop new ones in the future?
Well, there's Justice for All, South Carolina and the Civil Rights Movement, which tells the long story of civil rights starting from Reconstruction to a contemporary 1970s understanding. And that was first here at the University of South Carolina campus. It became quite popular and became a traveling exhibit where it traveled for about 2 years across the state. And following that, it's now home again on campus at the historic Booker T. Washington building, which was previously a all-black high school here in Columbia. And that's now where it's resting and residing and now available for tours by appointment only. And that has been great to engage with a lot of young people. That's sometimes their first civil rights museum experience. And just from the reception of through their eyes has been great because I start to see them making connections from what they're learning from their teachers. And it just brings them into a space again, just taking them out of that traditional classroom and traditional textbook experience where they get to see tangible history. And as our boss would say, like, this is history at work, that's the exhibit. It's really a proud piece of all the work the center has done thus far, put into this amazing display, and now to have it back home at the campus is great.
So this is not necessarily a traveling exhibit, I guess a more temporary exhibit, but we have one housed at the Columbia Museum of Art. It's called, well, the full name, Our Story Matters Gallery, Intersections on Main Street, African American Life in Columbia. And essentially it's about the Black business district that was there roughly from its creation starting in the 1870s and then up to its end in the 1970s. And we really had, at this point, I think over 25,000 guests to come through. We've been there since August of 2023. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep. And I've been lead gallery attendant there, so I'm usually there for the day-to-day operations for that. But what's really interesting about it is when we think about museums, especially when you see black and white photos, a lot of people are gone. So it's really a heart-touching situation where you have a civil rights leader that comes in and they see themselves, and I get to ask them how they feel, and sometimes they're a little choked up and it's a little surreal for them because they never thought of themselves being in a museum and somebody seeing this work. And then just even people just making those local connections for, oh, I didn't know the Levy's had a department store before they had a funeral home, and just how, once again, it's still in our backyard. And it's also the first time that we've had a comprehensive history of that Black business district here in Columbia. So just a lot of praise for what's happening, and also where do we go from here with that exhibit? We're not quite sure yet, but we do have another exhibit that, suggests where we go from here.
We have another exhibit called Where Do We Go From Here that is in the library currently. and looks at sort of after what we think of as as like the major civil rights movement, right? After the demonstrations, after the protests, and after the successes of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, where then do people who care about justice, who care about equality, where do we go from here? And that's actually the title from that comes from the name of Dr. King's final book, which was called Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? And it looks at some of the same questions he's asking in that book of how do we move forward from this point? But the center is always developing new exhibits. It's kind of part of what we're doing constantly. So we're actually working on one right now about health and justice that will open in the summer, hopefully.
Thank you, guys. Is there anything that you want our listeners to look into? That could be social media, podcasts, or just ways to get involved at the center.
Yes, well, you can follow us on Instagram at Civil Rights Center. We post about opportunities about getting involved, such as our upcoming HBCU student internships this summer. We also post about different events and contests and other things on that Instagram. So definitely follow us there.
And we post a lot of history. So you can learn about things that have happened in the past, just little blurbs on Instagram. But if you want a deeper look, you can visit justiceforallsc.org, which is a digital exhibit version of our Justice for All exhibit.
And then lastly, we have tours. So you can always schedule a tour. Some are by appointment, for our walking tours, for where to go from here. If you want to schedule an appointment for Booker T. Washington, so you can see the Justice for All exhibit while it's resting before it goes somewhere else. So that's just another way to get involved as well.
You can always contact us also through our website, civilrights.sc.edu.
Perfect. Today, we spoke about some of the parallels between Anne Frank and Martin Luther King Jr., as well as what it looks like to connect with young people through these topics. For more on our Black History Month campaign, or to learn more about the U.S. Anne Frank Youth Network, follow us on Instagram at us.AnneFrankYouthNetwork. We look forward to having you guys in our next episode. Thank you.